It's Vlogmas Day 25 and it's time to talk about my favourite books that I've read in the year 2022. Hi everyone, my name's Chloe, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for being here today. Today's video is a Vlogmas video up to and including Christmas Day. We've been doing a mixture of bookish and theatrical content. Today we are back with the books. It's actually the last day of Vlogmas. It's Christmas Day. Merry Christmas. I'm not actually expecting you all to watch this on Christmas Day, but it has been uploaded on Christmas Day and I am actually filming this on Christmas Eve because I wanted to leave this until the very last minute because, like I said, we're on bookish today. I'm going to be talking about my favourite books that I've read this year, and I wanted to leave it as late as possible because I know that some people, I'm talking about you Becca, will say that it is too early for me to upload this. I have plans for reading next week and none of those involve books that could be on this list. I'm basically going to be doing rereads and then some books that just would not be considered for this list anyway because of the type of books that they are, but I will tell you more about that in next week's vlog. So I've read everything that could potentially be on this list at this point now, and I've gathered a collection of books to talk to you about. I was originally going to do this as a top 10, but I have got more than 10 that I want to talk about, but also I don't quite have enough to do like a top 22 of 22. I've actually got a really random number because there are 14 books here to talk about. I did sort of leave a spot thinking that a book that I read this week may actually make this list and I'd do like a top 15. But then I didn't feel like it was quite good enough to put in this list, so I've left it out. And I did have some like honourable mentions that I could have added to this to make it up to 15, but I can't figure out which one would go in there or where it would go necessarily, so I've just kind of left it at the list that I had. So it's a really random top 14 of 2022, but these are honestly all the books that I can say these are my favourites of the year. Like I couldn't cut any of these out to make it into a top 10, so I thought it's better to have a random number than to leave something out that I don't want to leave out. So the first book on this list at number 14 randomly is A Diary of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I read this one in August, I think it was. I had an arc of it before this sort of traditionally published version came out. It was originally an indie published book and it's been picked up by a traditional publisher, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect going into this one. I knew that Meg loved it a lot, but me and Meg sometimes have very similar tastes, sometimes don't. I mean, you'll see actually in this list there's a few that she's recommended to me, and yeah, sometimes we are right in sync, sometimes we're really not. So I wasn't sure what to expect with this one, particularly as well knowing it was like a vampire story. It's basically about one of Dracula's wives, and it is also about sort of Dracula welcoming other people into that relationship as well. And I think I was just a bit worried that it was going to be like a typical vampire story because I don't tend to get on too well with those, but it was so much more than that. It's not actually like Dracula is in it, although I don't think he's ever actually called Dracula. He is a vampire, but like it's not the main focus of it. It's about the main woman, Constanta. It's about her in this abusive relationship essentially, and her sort of healing from it and finding strength in other people who are in a similar situation. And it's just a really beautiful book, and it's told in a letter format as well, and I just really loved it. And I kind of it's one of those that stuck with me afterwards as well. Like I can't stop thinking about it. I've recommended it a lot since I read it, so it kind of had to go on this list really. So at number 13 on this list we do kind of have two books, but I should say that I do have a rule when I'm making these sorts of lists that if I have read sort of two books by the same author or like multiple books in a series, then I will only pick one to put on this list, because there's an author later on that I've read like 10 books from this year and I could have put multiple ones of those on this list, but I've chosen not to. But with this one, it's just two books in the series and they kind of go together anyway, because to be honest they are very short. Should really read them together anyway because it's just like a nice experience then, but for the purpose of this video I've only got one of them, and it is A Song for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. So I read this back in January, so I think again that's kind of showing how much I must have loved it if I'm still thinking about it now, like almost exactly a year later. This is about a character called Sibylline Dex. They're a tea monk, so they basically go around, make people tea, listen to their problems, and they're feeling a little bit lost doing this. And then one day they meet a robot, and basically in this world robots used to sort of live amongst humans until they left to kind of let humans get on with life themselves and lead them to their destruction basically. And this is set when one of the robots makes contact again, and they have one question for all the humans, which is, what do you need? And it is a sci-fi story, obviously we're talking about robots here, but at its heart it's a character-led story, and it's just really beautiful, kind of whimsical, a bit like a cozy sci-fi is the way I've described it before. And as I said, I did love the second book in this series as well. I do hope we actually get more from this world because it's just like a really nice read. It's a nice world to enter into, and I love both these characters in this book as well. And then at number 12 we have a book that Meg has been shouting at everyone to read for quite a while now. I think she bought pretty much everyone in our friend group this book. Mine just arrived with a gift note saying, if you own it you have to read it, right? That book is You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogle. So I did read this last month and I had a really good time with this one. It's about an engaged couple who basically don't want to be engaged anymore. But if either of them says that, they are sort of left on the line to pay for everything to do with the wedding. So they start a sort of game of one-upmanship to irritate the other one into calling off the wedding. And that does not sound like a romance book. But basically during the course of this book, they kind of come back to each other and realise sort of what went wrong in their relationship in the first place. And it's a really, really well done story. Like, it is a miscommunication trope. That is the main element in this book, which is not necessarily something that I would like look for in a romance book, because sometimes I just want to hit characters' heads together and be like, talk, that's all you need to do. But the reasons for the miscommunication in this one and the way it was handled was done so well that I didn't care that it was a trope that's not my favourite, because I was just very, very much involved in this relationship. And like I said, it all made perfect sense. Like I said, the reasons for the miscommunication made sense. At times, I was not sure how they would ever actually manage to find their way back to each other, but then when they did, it felt so realistic and so well done. It was just a very, very good read. I am actually reading another Sarah Hogel book at the minute, but it's okay that I'm still in the middle of that, because like I said, I only put one from each author on this list anyway, and also I'm like 100 pages in and I can already tell that I prefer this one. But she is an author that I will keep an eye out for more books from. I actually have another one to read, which should be read hopefully early next year. But yeah, thank you to Meg for making me read this one, and I think actually pretty much everyone else that you've made read this one loved it, so I think you're doing well there with this recommendation. At number 11, I have a book that I don't actually have to hold up right now because I read an arc of it. I do have a physical copy on its way because I've ordered the pretty version from Fairy Loot, but that will be coming next year, so I'm just going to put a picture up here, and that is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Boston. So another romance book. This has got a little bit of a fantasy twist to it though. I say a little bit, it's about a ghost, so there is a sort of supernatural element to it. Basically, it's about a girl who is a ghostwriter, but she's kind of struggling with doing that job because she's ghostwrites for a romance author, and she's gone through a bad breakup herself, not really feeling in the mood to write the romance. So she goes to her new editor, has a bit of an argument with him about her not doing what she's supposed to do for a job, and then there's a family emergency that happens, so she ends up having to leave town, go back home to her family. While she's dealing with that, she opens the front door of her family house and sees her editor stood there as a ghost. And most of the storyline is about sort of how to help him cross over to the other side. Basically, she just wants to get rid of him from her life. But there is a romance between the main character and the editor, who is a ghost, which sounds like it should not work, but it really, really does. One of my favourite book series growing up actually was the Mediator series by Meg Cabot. This kind of reminds me of that in a way, because that was a romance that also should not have worked, also involved a ghost, but you were like, even though you knew it shouldn't work, you were praying for it to work all the way through. It did remind me a little bit of that. It also reminded me of the film Just Like Heaven with Reese Witherspoon and Mark Ruffalo in it, which was also one of my favourite films when it first came out. So I feel like this one was set up to be a win for me, really, because it just had a lot of themes from things that I've loved before in it. Also, I am a fan of Ashley Boston's writing. I've read the Once Upon a Con series, which was her YA series, and I really, really enjoyed that. So I was interested to see what she'd be like writing an adult book, and I think I love this even more than that series, which was, again, one of my favourite series when it first came out. So like I said, I feel like this is a book that was kind of made for me to love, but at the same time I was terrified going into it because I was like, what if it's not everything I want it to be? But luckily it was, and like I said, I will have my pretty Fairy Loot edition coming soon, which I'm very excited for, and I may have to reread it when I get a physical copy as well. We are actually into the top 10 now, and for some reason all the romance is lumped together in this list, by the way, so we've already had two. We'll move on to the next one, and that is The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane. So in this book you've got a main character who is on a TV show that is basically The Bachelor, and he is The Bachelor. So are all these women competing for, I think it's his hand in marriage. I say this every time, I can never remember if they're actually competing for him to propose to them, because that's what happens on the actual Bachelor, or if it's just like a relationship. But either way, they are competing for him, and he's like the worst person to be on this show because he's just not got the right temperament for it. He's just a ball of anxiety for the majority of this book, and basically what helps him to sort of relax during the course of this filming is this producer that he's paired up with to kind of like help him while he's on the show. The producer is called Dev. But then what starts to happen is it turns out that Charlie, the Bachelor, isn't actually interested in any of the girls that are competing for him, and instead is interested in Dev, the producer. And again, this is one that I sort of went into going like, I could really love this. It feels like just the type of story that I will get obsessed with, but also if it's done like just slightly wrong, it'll just be really cheesy and over the top and I'll hate it. Luckily it was the first option. I really love this. I have actually read another book by Alison Cochrane this month. I read Kiss the Ones for Me, which is a sapphic Christmas book, which I also really loved. I think Alison Cochrane is another author that I will be needing to buy more from, whatever she writes in the future, because yeah, both of her books this year have been a 5-star. This is the one that I decided to put on the list, but really both of them could have been on there. I had a really good time, and now I really want to reread this. I did this last year. Every time I talked about a book, I'm like, oh, should I reread that soon? This one I actually could, because it's a quick romance, so we'll see. At number 9, we have another romance, and that is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. So this is actually the start of a companion series. I've read 2 of them this year. This is the first one. This is my favourite as well, because I gave this one 5 stars and the second one 4 stars. But I enjoyed them both, but there's something about this one that I just loved. It is a sapphic romance companion series, and basically all the stories are different, but it does centre around a friendship group, which is why it's a companion series. So the first one in this series is about Delilah Green. She's moved away from this small town that she grew up in, but she has to come back home for her stepsister's wedding. And she's not exactly got the best history with this town or with her stepsister or her stepmother. Her father's passed away, so this is the only family that she has left, and she kind of left them behind and doesn't really talk to them too much. And then when she gets there for the wedding, she ends up flirting with this woman in a bar who turns out to be the stepsister Astrid's best friend Claire. It's just about their romance that starts during this wedding and everything else that happens with Delilah coming back to this town. And I just had a really good time reading this book. I loved both of the main characters. I really loved the romance in it, which is great because it's a romance book. You kind of want to be rooting for them. That is actually as well why I prefer this one to the other one. It's just that the romance in this one, I bought into it more. And there's not really too much else to say. I read it in pretty much a day. I went down to a concert and I went on the coach to Milton Keynes, and I read it on the way, and then I read it and then while I was waiting for the band to come on as well, because I'd gone on my own. And it was just a really good way to pass the afternoon. Again, another one that I really want to reread, just talking about it now. Maybe it'll happen. At number 8, we had the first one on this list where one of my favourite authors has put a new book out this year, and that is I Kiss Shara Wheeler by Katie McQuiston. This is one that when I was putting this list together, I kind of forgot about a little bit because I read it quite early on in the year. I got an arc of it, so I read it before it was actually released. But then when I was thinking about it, I'm like, oh no, actually, I really loved that book. This is Katie McQuiston's first YA book. It follows our main character, Chloe Green, who is about to graduate, and she's in competition with Shara Wheeler to be valedictorian. And like the month before graduation, Shara Wheeler comes up to her, kisses her, and then disappears. And then what happens is these notes are delivered to 3 different people, and it turns out it's 3 people that Shara kissed just before she disappeared. And then the sort of mystery starts from there, and they try and track down where she went and what kind of her story is, because there's more to it basically. And one of the things that I loved about this book is that it's set in sort of the Bible Belt of America, so it's in a very religious town, and whilst the main character is very sort of open with her identity and her sexuality, it's not something that's necessarily accepted in the town that she lives in. And a lot of the focus in this book, as in quite a lot of Katie McQuiston's work actually, is about sort of found family and how important those connections are to kind of help you get through things like this. And it was sort of the friendship group and also actually the parents of Chloe, the main character in this, that I really loved within this book. And again, it's one that I feel like I need to reread. How many times am I going to say that in this? This is actually one that I do plan on rereading next year, because I've reread Red, White and Royal Blue many times. I've only read this on One Last Stop once, and I want to read both of those again next year just because I love Katie McQuiston, so why not? At number 7, we have one that actually upsets me in a way that it's on this list, because I read the sequel, and the sequel is on my most disappointing books of the year list. The book is The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I loved this book, hence why it is on this list. But part of me did consider not putting it on this list purely because the sequel let me down a lot. Basically, it's about these 6 students who are recruited into the Alexandrian Society. And part of the thing when they're recruited is that they know that while 6 of them have been recruited, only 5 of them actually get to be part of the society at the end of it. And at the start of this book, you don't really know what that means, like what it means if you're not selected, how they select who is going to be part of it. You just don't really know any of it, and neither do the characters. So everyone is kind of constantly on edge throughout it. You don't know who to trust at any point because none of them trust each other. And then there is this sort of whole academic side of it as well, which I found really interesting. It's very heavily science-based, and there's just so much that I loved about this book. And when I was thinking about what to say on this video, actually, I realised more of the things that I didn't like in the second book, because what I said before is that this leaves on a cliffhanger that really made me want to come back for more in the second book. And then it felt like in the second one that they kind of just didn't make any movement on that for a while. But I think what I've also realised is that once you have sort of learned what the actual thing is of the society and why only 5 of them are going to get picked and how that happens, the intrigue disappears a little bit. I don't think it needed to be a trilogy. I love that I'm talking about my favourite books and I'm just sort of telling you what I don't like about the second one. I have very high hopes for the third book. I do think that an ending to this series could work really well. I just feel like the second book was maybe a little bit filler, but this first book was so good. Like, the setup of it was fantastic, and I will still continue to recommend this one even though I didn't love the second one, because I'm really hoping it pulls it back with the third one. At number 6 we have another one that I can't actually hold up because I only have the ebook copy of this. I will eventually get a physical copy of it. It is Bunny by Mona Awad. So this is a weird book and it's going to be very hard to explain, but basically it's set at university. Our main character is a writer. She's in this writing class with a bunch of girls who all refer to each other as Bunny. Like, when they talk to each other they call each other Bunny and nothing else. They're a very strange group, and she's not really sure what's going on with them, but she knows that something weird is happening. And then one day she gets invited to one of their sort of writing sessions that they do, or at least she thinks it's a writing session. And then I'm not going to tell you anything else from there, because basically she gets to see inside this world and see what is actually happening, and it is weird. And I can tell you, like, scene for scene what happened in this book, but I can't tell you why anything happened or how anything happened. It just happened, and it's strange, and I loved it. It's strange in the best way possible, and I'm not going to talk about it for too long because I think it's better to go in not knowing too much about it, but it's weird and I loved it, and that's all I'm going to say. Speaking of weird books that I love, at number 5 we've got another one by a favourite author, and that is Gallant by V. Schwab. This one came out in March. It is quite different to anything that V. Schwab has written before, but I really enjoyed it. It's not my favourite of hers that I've ever read, hence why it's only number 5 on this list, because like in other years, if V. Schwab had a new book coming out, it would be number 1 on the list. But I did really enjoy this. It's about a main character called Olivia, who is an orphan at the start of this book, and then she receives a letter saying that her uncle that she didn't know existed has died, and she's invited to come to his estate. And then when she gets there are a couple of rules, and one of them is about staying on this side of a wall that is in the garden. And obviously at some point she's gonna go on the wrong side of the wall and kind of discover the world that exists there, because everything is not as it seems at Gallant. As you can probably guess from that synopsis, it's got like this creepy haunted house vibe to it. It was described as a secret garden meets Crimson Peak, and that sold it to me pretty much straight away, to be honest, because Crimson Peak is a very underrated film. And I did really enjoy this book. I particularly love all the artwork and things that's throughout this book and the atmosphere of it. I think it's the whole reading experience that I really enjoyed with this. I think the actual story itself, like I said, isn't my favourite V. Schwab. I've seen them write things that are a lot more intricate before. This is intended for a slightly younger audience, so that's probably part of the reason it's a bit more simplistic as well. But also it is intended to be a book that you kind of do just sit and read in one sitting. So it has to be more simple to kind of lend itself to that, and I think it works really well for what V. Schwab was trying to achieve with this book. And again, it's one that I think I need to reread, because I only read it the once in March, just before it came out, because I got the arc like at the beginning of March and it came out at the end of March. But yeah, how many of these books will I actually reread, and how many will I just say that I want to reread? That is the question. The number 4 on this list I actually think I will reread, because I've only read the arc so far. It's not actually even out yet, and I have actually put it on my most anticipated books for next year as well, even though it is actually on my favourite books for this year. Spoiler alert for something that's coming up later on. This is the one exception to the rule of only putting an author on this list once, because I couldn't not put both of these books on this list, and they are so vastly different that I couldn't not put them on. I can't hold this up, like I said, because I have an arc. This is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I wonder what other book by R.F. Kuang is going to come up later on. Yellowface is completely different to anything I have read by R.F. Kuang before, and I have read 5 books now by this author. I've read everything that she's published, actually. So it's about a character called June, who is a white woman. She's an author. She's not been that successful. She's had a book out. It didn't do great. One of her classmates from university is having a great career. She's called Athena. She's an Asian woman, also an author, and her book series has been very well received. She was published very young. As in general, just having a great career. June and Athena have this sort of strange relationship where they do still talk, but you do also get the feeling that one of them thinks the friendship is a lot stronger than the other one does. The book starts off when they go out for drinks one night, end up back at Athena's apartment, and then due to a tragic accident, Athena ends up dead. June then takes Athena's manuscript that nobody else has seen yet and decides that she's going to complete it and publish it herself, giving Athena 0 credit. So the book basically is all about June taking this work, and part of it is sort of the tension of whether or not she's going to get found out for stealing this other author's work, all of that type of stuff that you expect. Part of it is also the discussion of who has the right to tell different people's stories, because Athena's book centres on Chinese people. It is heavily influenced by actual Chinese history, and it is the idea of whether or not a white woman should be the person that is telling these stories. And when I say it's very different from anything that R.F. Kuang has written before, part of that is because it's set in modern times and it's very much sort of involved in the publishing industry as well. So like book Twitter is a big thing within this book, and sort of the toxic behaviour that happens a lot around the publishing industry as well. And it's so interesting to read. R.F. Kuang described it as a Twitter flame war in a book, and That is a perfect way of describing it. It is such a good book, and I do recommend that people pick it up when it is. It's published in May 2023, and I'm going to stop talking about it now because, again, I really, really want to reread it, and I will when it actually comes out, when I get my... I was about to say when I get my finished copy. We all know I'm going to get more than one finished copy of this book, don't we? Okay, we're into our top 3 now. I would like you all to try and guess what my top 3 books are going to be. I think you already know my number 1, like we know this, but can you guess what my other 2 are going to be? Okay, I'll give you a second. Okay, at number 3 we have got The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So this is another one that I read because of Meg. Well, it isn't. I've been wanting to read this for a while anyway, but then she did put it on my TBR game, so it was Meg that like forced me to read it within that month. I am not mad about it. I had actually already bought the Illumicrate special editions of this and Circe is one of the books that probably would have been on this list if I was doing more than one book by each author, which I know I've just like done that with Aracong, but Song of Achilles and Circe are like more similar vibes than Yellowface and another book that I will mention later are. And this one is definitely my favourite. So this is a Greek myth retelling. It tells the story of Achilles and Patroclus, so it's set during the Trojan War. I'm not going to go into the full synopsis of it, but basically what I'm going to say is that this is beautiful. Like, the way that Madeline Miller writes is beautiful. I thought it was going to be harder for me to get into, like with it being Greek mythology. I just thought it was going to be really dense, and it's not. It's a very, very easy read, and it made me cry. Not a lot of books make me cry, although actually the top 3 all made me cry. So I suppose that's why they are the top 3. But yeah, I just really, really love this book. I've also read a short story by Madeline Miller this year, actually, Gallant, and I also really, really love that one. Madeline Miller is definitely a favourite author these days, and yeah, another one that I want to reread. Of course. Okay, so my number 2 on this list is not one that I'm going to reread anytime soon because I would have to read a lot of books to get to this one. Can you guess what it's going to be? I feel like that gave you a hint. So my number 2 on this list is Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the 16th book in the Realm of the Elderlings. It is the final book in the Realm of the Elderlings. So it's the last book in the Fits and the Fool trilogy, but like I said, 16 books overall. I adore the Realm of the Elderlings. Like, I think I definitely put one of these books in my top 10 last year as well. So it's no surprise that something from this series was going to pop up in the list this year. There were many competitors to appear in this list, to be honest, particularly stuff from the Tawny Man trilogy. I really love that as well. But there was something about how this ending all came together, and I really can't tell you too much about it because obviously last book in a very long series. But I will give you a synopsis of the first book in the series to kind of tell you what the world is. Basically, we start off following a character called Fitz, who is the bastard son of the Crown Prince. He one day ends up getting left on his father's doorstep by his paternal grandfather, who's like, "We've had enough of you, let your dad go and raise you instead." His dad quickly abdicates the throne, and he is left to be raised by the stable master Barich until he is old enough to kind of catch the attention of the king, because essentially he kind of straddles 2 worlds. He is close enough to the royal family that he can attend all the functions and things like that and gain trust, but he is also far enough away that he can do things that are a little bit more nefarious, hence why it's called Assassin, because he gets trained, hence why a lot of the books have got Assassin in the title, because he gets trained to be an assassin. And so much has happened since then, and like I said, I really can't tell you anything from this one, but what I will say is that this was a perfect ending for this series. I feel like a lot of things that I've been waiting for to come together happened in this book. But it wasn't predictable. It still very much took me by surprise. Like, there were multiple times where I thought, why are there still like 200, 300 pages left of this book? Because it felt like it was the end. And then when it actually got to the end, I was just a mess. Like, it's just so good. And yeah, it's going to be very, very quick talking about this one because, like I said, I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But if you are like daunted of starting the Realm of the Elderlings, please don't be. It's such a good series, and they are actually quite easy to read. Like, to say they're like heavy fantasy, they are actually very, very easy to read. Do expect some pain though, because pain. We got to my number 1 book of the year. Any guesses? I haven't spoke about one book like non-stop since I read it back in May, June, one of those times. Like, no one's winning any prizes for guessing what my favourite book of the year is. Are we all shocked that I'm holding Babble in my hand right now? My number 1 book of the year is Babble by R.F. Kuang. Like I said, I've spoke about this book so many times now, I don't even know what to say in this video. It's just so good. It's just such a good book. It's dark academia. It's about a main character called Robin, who's brought over from China as the ward of this professor who works at Oxford University. And from a very early age, he's taught lots of different languages. That is what the professor teaches. And at first you could be forgiven for thinking that that's why he's being taught these languages, is that it's purely just because that is what the professor knows. But then Robin gets to Oxford and he ends up being part of Babel, which is basically the school that studies languages at Oxford. But there is a lot more to it than that as well, because this world is sort of an alternate history where there is magic, and it's all based on silverwork and language. So translation is a big part of how this world runs. And I haven't actually said when it's set, but it's set during the 1800s. It's set very much during the time of the British Empire. You can probably gather from that Britain uses a lot of the places within its empire for their own gain, for their languages, so that they can do this silver work. And that's kind of like the general setup of the world. But the actual story for Robin is about his time sort of at this university, figuring out where he stands there, like within the university, but also within the world as a whole. And he makes some friends with other people who are in a similar situation, and then things kind of go from there. And I'm not going to tell you too much else, although I feel like the actual, the full title of the book tells you a little bit more about what to expect, because whilst we have it as Babel, it's actually called Babble, or The Necessity of Violence, an arcane history of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. So you can see where we're going from there. I do love a good revolution. Like, we all know my favourite musicals tend to involve revolutionaries as well. So this is it's such a good book. I can't even explain why. I spoke about it so many times. The writing is amazing. Like, Ora Kwong is a fantastic writer anyway, but with this book in particular, and then with reading Yellowface after as well, I'm astounded at how different her writing is when she's doing different types of books, because this is completely different to the Poppy War, and it has a very distinct feel to it. And then Yellowface had a very distinct feel to it as well. And within this one in particular, like, there is so much research that must have gone into this. Footnotes throughout are giving you more information about translation, all of the little like nerdy stuff about language I just loved so much. All of the sort of commentary about sort of the colonialism side of it as well was just so well done within this book. This book sort of made me want to go and read more afterwards about like all of the subjects that were touched on in here, and I think for a dark academia that is exactly what it should have done. But also, let's not forget about the characters as well, because it's great having all of this academia and stuff like that, but you also want to be rooting for the people, and I was, because there were things that happened to these characters in this book and it broke me emotionally, and it broke half of my friends as well, because the amount of messages I've had when people got to certain parts in this book, because obviously I read it before my friends had read it. Like Ash, Lisa and Meg have all messaged me when they've got to certain parts of this book and been like, oh, I did not see that coming. I'm like, yes, exactly. Oh, I love this book so much. I've read it 2 times this year. I will be rereading this one. All the others I'm like, I want to reread them. This one I will be. I can guarantee it. But yeah, anyone surprised? Like, nobody's surprised. So that is everything. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for watching all of the Vlogmas videos, however many you've managed to watch. Thank you so much. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff down below. Let me know what your favourite book was of this year, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye.